Okay, brethren, I think all of us would like to see God's hand in our lives, working in our lives from day to day. That would be very good. But I think most of us recognize, at least for most of us, as far as I'm aware, we very rarely see God's explicit hand in our lives, right? And we sometimes might wonder, well, I wonder if God's there. When I pray and ask God for something, is a response, anything I can see, right? Is he answering my prayer? And it would be great, of course, if God did explicitly intervene in our lives from day to day and week to week. Perhaps an angel might turn up with a message. Oh, that's great. Well, there's Angel Gabriel coming to talk to me and give me some direction. Very nice. But of course, typically that's not what happens, right? And so we're left to wonder if there's no express intervention by God in our lives. Is he there? Is he working with us or not? And that's, I think, where the Book of Esther, where we're going today, can help, because this is a book in the Bible. You may as well start looking for it whilst I'm blithering away here, because that's where we're going, Esther chapter 1. But the Book of Esther is a book in the Bible. It comes after Ezra and Nehemiah, if you're still looking. But the Book of Esther, strangely, for a Bible book, doesn't refer anywhere to God or the Lord. That's a bit odd, isn't it, you would have thought? And yet it's quite clear as we go through the story in Esther that God was very much involved in the events that took place and, of course, the outcome, because we have what some people refer to as the hidden God. God's not visible directly in the Book of Esther. It doesn't say God this, God that, doesn't even mention any prophet anywhere. It's just the story of Esther and the Jews of that day. And yet it's quite obvious from the number of remarkable, unusual series of coincidences that God was in there orchestrating events to bring about a certain outcome. So though you don't see God directly, you don't see him at all in that sense, he's the hidden God in this book, you do see coincidences that reveal his involvement. I think as Albert Einstein said, coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. You don't see him, but the coincidences reveal his handiwork. So we're going to review the Book of Esther from that perspective, and then of course we can perhaps in our own lives look for strange coincidences that actually do reveal God's involvement in your life, in my life. There's several reasons for looking at the Book of Esther. Number one, it's a great story. It's an entertaining story, real people, real situation, good story to learn about. It also tells us, another thing, the origins of the festival of Purim, which this year falls the middle of March, festival of Purim, Purim. That comes from the Book of Esther. And like I said, it could also reveal how we could be alert in our own lives to unusual coincidences that might indeed reveal the hand of God in your life or in my life. So let's start in Esther chapter 1. And we'll start reading verses 1 through 12, just to get sort of established. So Esther 1 and verse 1. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, this was the Ahasuerus who reigned over 127 provinces, from India to Ethiopia. And just a quick comment there, Ahasuerus is known in history, they believe, as Xerxes. They were a very well-known king of Persia. Xerxes, 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 king of Persia. And this was set around about the time of 480 to 470 BC, give or take a bit. So about 100 years after Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Jerusalem. At that time, Nebuchadnezzar took all the Jews to Babylon. They were going to be there for at least 70 years, according to prophecy. At the end of that 70 years, King Cyrus opened up permission for the Jews to go back to Judea, back to Jerusalem, but only a minority went, a few tens of thousands. The vast majority stayed in Babylon and in Medo-Persia as well, because they were comfortable there. They lived there, they had homes there, they had schools there, they had businesses there, they had farms there, orchards, vineyards, whatever. So the days of Esther, Esther turns out to be a Jewish lady, a Jewess. The Jews were living across Babylon, across Medo-Persia, right? And this is King Xerxes, as known in history. In those days, verse 2, when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the citadel, that in the 3rd year of his reign, quite early on, he made a feast for all his officials and servants, the powers of Persia and Media, the nobles, the princes of the provinces, being before him, when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom, the splendor of his excellent majesty for many days, 180 days in all. That's a feast.
That's a party, yeah.
6 months of feasting, and it's for the princes and the nobles, the elite of Medo-Persia in that day, and that demonstrates something. Probably demonstrates he was a prideful man, wants to show off his glory, his majesty, his kingdom to all the top dogs there, right? Verse 5, and when these days were completed, the king made another feast. There's going to be 3 feasts here in the first chapter. So a second feast, another feast, lasting 7 days. Hardly worth bothering, I would have thought. For all the people who were present in Shushan, the citadel, from great to small, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. So it's a local feast for those in the city, right? Only 7 days. 6 months for the nobles, the princes, the top dogs. 7 days for the locals in the city itself. There were white and blue linen curtains fastened with cords of fine linen and purple on silver rods and marble pillars, and the couches were of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of alabaster, turquoise, and white and black marble. Sounds quite luxurious, quite impressive. He was a king. In those days, kings lived in opulence and luxury, and of course, they ruled with a firm hand because they were king. They had complete, total authority. Verse 7, and they served drinks in golden vessels, each vessel being different from the other, with royal wine in abundance, according to the generosity of the king. In accordance with the law, the drinking was not compulsory, for so the king had ordered all the officers of his household they should do according to each man's pleasure. So some drank a lot, some perhaps didn't drink much, if any. It wasn't compulsory. Queen Vashti also made a feast. That's the 3rd feast. Queen Vashti also made a feast for the women in the royal palace, which belonged to King Ahasuerus. So lots of partying going on, right? Hard life back in those days if you were a king in Medo-Persia. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he probably had too many tipples that day, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing her royal crown, in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold. I guess she was. And he's a proud man. He's got this majesty, magnificence, the wine, the feasting, whatever they had in those days to eat, boar perhaps, or cows, whatever, lambs and so on, lots and lots of them. But now he's had a drink or two, a few glasses of whiskey. He wants to show off his wife because she's beautiful. Let's assume she is beautiful. So he's going to show her off to his nobles. Yeah, me, king, super rich, look at my wife. Come on, Queen Vashti, come in and show yourself to my mates, my buddies, just how beautiful you are and how special I am to have you as a wife. Verse 12, but Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command brought by his eunuchs. Therefore the king was furious, and his anger burned within him. He's not a happy bunny, right? Because his wife refuses. Well, I mean, she might in some ways be in the right, because if he's drunk, if his buddies are equally drunk, she might not want to come and do a sort of beauty parade, right, in front of these drunkards. Might think, oh, it's below me and so on. But whatever, she says no. And of course, it's a problem now because this is the king, King Xerxes, who has the power of life and death, because that's what the kings did in those big empires. And now he's been publicly humiliated, at least in his own eyes, because his nobles are there. right? You've also got the common people of Shushan there, but you've also got the nobles, the princes, the governors from around the country, and he's just said, hey guys, wait till you see my wife. Tell Vashti to come over here so I can show her off. And she says, get lost. So that's a public affront to the king. What can he do? He can't accept that. A public affront. So he has to decide, well, how do I respond to this insult to my majesty? So let's read verses 13 and 15 to 18. Verse 13, then the king said to the wise men who understood the times, for this was the king's manner toward all who knew law and justice. Verse 15, what shall we do to Queen Vashti according to law, because she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus brought to her by the eunuchs? I suppose it's probably the normal thing that a king's request is taken to be essentially an order or a command, right? So he's saying here she was commanded to come, and she's not coming. She's refused. So what do we do with that situation? Verse 16, and Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Queen Vashti has not only wronged the king, but also all the princes and all the people who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will become known to all women, so that they will despise their husbands in their eyes when they report that King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought in before him, but she did not come. This very day the noble ladies of Persia and Media will say to all the king's officials that they have heard of the behavior of the queen. Thus there will be excessive contempt and wrath. So as far as they're concerned, their perception is that once women find out that the queen told her husband to get lost, they're going to feel that, well, if she can do that, I can do that. This old goat that I live with, right, smells and never washes himself properly, and never trims his beard or his hair. He's a complete rogue. If Queen Vashti can do that to the king, I can do that to him. So they're concerned that this is going to spread like wildfire, and suddenly there's going to be problems in society, because all the women, in their view at least, I think they're probably exaggerating, but all the women are going to throw their husbands under the bus. And that's not good for society, not good for the children, not good for employment and so on. Let's read verses 19 to 21. If it pleases the king, this is their solution, if it pleases the king, let a royal decree go out from him, and let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, which can never be changed, of course, so that it will not be altered, that Vashti shall come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position as queen to another who is better than she. When the king's decree, public decree, which he will make is proclaimed throughout all his empire, for it's a great empire, all wives will honour their husbands, both great and small. And the reply pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. Right, so they sent out this public decree all across the empire, from Ethiopia to India, 1,000 miles and more, saying that Queen Vashti is banished. She's no more queen. She's gone. She's been memory hold. Adios, Vashti. And in fact, there's going to be a vacancy created here for a new queen at some point. That was their sort of view. And it can't be changed, because the law of the Medes and Persians, you can't change it. Remember the story of Daniel, when Darius issued a stupid decree about anybody who prays to any other god than me is going to go into the lion's den, and then he discovers that Daniel's been found out praying to God. Oh my word! He's got to go to the lion's den, and Darius is trying hard to try and find a loophole or way around that. Doesn't want to put Daniel in jeopardy, but as his advisors say, you can't change it. The law of the Medes and Persians cannot be changed. So Vashti is gone, really for good. Now, of course, first chapter there, chapter 1, there's no reference to God anywhere, and there's no reference in the rest of the book. The name God doesn't appear, which certainly seems a bit odd when you're talking about a book in the Bible. You'd have thought God would be in every single book in the Bible, but not formally, not explicitly. And the interesting thing here, in a sense, is that a vacancy, if I can call it that, arises for a new queen. Can't be often that happens. I mean, perhaps if a queen dies, right? But here's a vacancy for Ahasuerus to obtain a new queen, a new lady in his life. That's unexpected. It's not planned, right? A new lady is going to be a strong influence in King Ahasuerus' life. And that becomes relevant when we look at the potential problems, because later in the book there is a genuine, severe risk of the Jewish people being exterminated, right? And the first coincidence here is that at this particular time, when the Jews are potentially about to be exterminated, a vacancy arises for the king to have a new queen. Okay, is that just a coincidence? Well, maybe it is, but it's a coincidence that happily has a good ending. Let's read chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. After these things, and I think the historians say probably 2 or 3, 4 years has elapsed here, King Xerxes went off to fight the Greeks and got a bloody nose out of that. If you know the story of the 300 Spartans, it was that episode there. So he comes back probably a little bit downhearted after being defeated by Greece. But after these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus subsided, he remembered Vashti, what she had done, and what had been decreed against her. And people speculate perhaps he was having second thoughts. She was a beautiful woman by the sound of it. He had been married to her, and now 2 or 3 years has elapsed. He might be thinking about, I don't know, maybe I was a bit hot-headed, a bit too much wine, maybe. But of course, that's not going to work for his advisors, because they're probably thinking, hang on a second, we helped to get rid of her. If she comes back, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. We'll be in serious trouble if she comes back, right? So they want to make sure that she doesn't come back and that they can divert the king's attention. So they come up with a project. Then the king's servants who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather all the beautiful young virgins to Shushan the citadel, into the women's quarters under the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, custodian of the women. And let beauty preparations be given them. Then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti." This thing pleased the king, and he did so. He thought, oh, wow, a beauty parade. Probably hundreds of beautiful young women to be brought here, and I'm going to look at them all and try them out and see which one I like. And the one I like most will be the new queen. Oh, sounds exciting. And he's a king, right? Probably plenty of testosterone, so he thinks, great idea this is, right? And so they start to do that. There's going to be a beauty parade of all these beautiful young women, the finest that Persia can produce. Let's read verses 5 and 7. In Shushan the citadel, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite. And verse 7, and Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is, Esther, the lady herself, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So I think she's technically his cousin, right? And these are, of course, two of the main players in the book. Esther, from whom the book is named, and Mordecai, her cousin, uncle sort of guy. And the name, it says that her name was Hadassah in Hebrew, which means myrtle, and Esther, which is the Persian for star. Although apparently Esther is closely linked to the Hebrew root for hidden, which is curious because in a sense Esther was hidden. Her identity was hidden from public view, as we'll see as we go along. So let's read verses 8 through 10. So it was when the king's command and decree was heard, and when many young women were gathered at Shushan the citadel under the custody of Haggai, that Esther also was taken to the king's palace into the care of Haggai, the custodian of the women. Now the young woman pleased him, and she obtained his favour, so he readily gave beauty preparations to her, besides her allowance. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her from the king's palace, and he moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women. Esther had not revealed her people or family, for Mordecai had charged her not to reveal it. So she's in the group, right? And she's especially favoured by this eunuch who's looking after the women as the custodian of the women. Right, so here's a young Jewish lady that nobody knows is Jewish, apart from, I guess, her Mr. Mordecai, and she's going to be taken into the citadel, into the palace, to be got ready to meet the king as one of the beauties who's been sort of gathered together. So verses 12 to 14 tell us the process that was followed. Each young woman's turn came to go into King Ahasuerus after she had completed 12 months' preparation. Some say a long period because just in case any were pregnant. They wouldn't want to find out and so try and blame King Ahasuerus for it. So you'd wait a number of months, make sure nothing's occurring there. And plus, of course, the preparation itself. According to the regulations for the women, for thus were the days of their preparation apportioned 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with perfumes and preparations for beautifying women, whatever that was in those days. Lots of showers, lots of essential oils, lots of perfumes, lots of Max Factor, whatever they used in those days. lots of Pilates classes to make sure that the posture was good, and so on. Verse 13, thus prepared, each young woman went to the king, and she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the women's quarters to the king's palace. In the evening she went, and in the morning she returned to the second house of the women, to the custody of Shaashgaz, the king's eunuch, who kept the concubines. She would not go in to the king again unless the king delighted in her and called for her by name. So one night stand, essentially. Go and see the king, unless he calls for you again, that's you finished. You're essentially a widow, because you go to the second house where the women are under this other eunuch, and unless he calls for you, you're finished. That's the way they did things in those days. Not sure we particularly like that, but that's how kings of those days had harems, right? That's what happens. Verse 15 through 20. Now when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter to go into the king, she requested nothing but what Haggai, the king's eunuch, the custodian of the women, advised. And Esther obtained favour in the sight of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. And it carries on, the king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she obtained grace and favour in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast, the feast of Esther, for all his officials and servants, and he proclaimed a holiday in the provinces and gave gifts according to the generosity of a king. So this is unusual. Here we have a young Jewish woman as close to the king of Persia as you could get. She shares his bed, right? So in a sense, all the ducks are being lined up here for the deliverance, which is still a few chapters away. Even though there's no danger to the Jewish people obvious as yet, it helps that a Jewish girl is married to the king of Persia. That becomes like super important. Like I said, you can see, because we know the story, so we already know the outcome. But what you got here is, it's like, God hidden from visible sight is busy moving pieces around on his chessboard, or getting his ducks lined up, if you prefer, right? Esther chapter 2. Let's read verses 21 to 23. In those days, while Mordecai sat within the king's gate, which I think means he was, at least in some aspect of government, King's Gate is where all the main business and trade and contracts were signed and so on. Mordecai is there. don't think it means he just sits outside a portcullis or something. He's actually part of the local governance. In those days, while Mordecai sat within the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So they're plotting to assassinate him. Doesn't say why, right? But these things happen. These things happened not too long ago in a certain country across the Atlantic where somebody sought to assassinate a presidential candidate. So these things happen, right? Verse 22, so the matter became known to Mordecai. How? Did he overhear them talking? Did somebody else overhear them talking and tell Mordecai? Doesn't tell us how, but strangely, this might be another coincidence. Mordecai finds out there's a plot to assassinate the king, who told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. So she gave credit to Mordecai. Mr. Mordecai, who sits just by your gate and so on, tells me there's a plot to assassinate you, my lord king. And she says Mordecai's name, so the king, yep, Mordecai, got that. And when an inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed, and both were hanged on a gallows. And it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. So they had a book, like current affairs, what's happening, the up-to-date news. They bring that out, the scroll, unroll it, write down the details of what just took place, including Mordecai's name, and that he's helped to save the king from being assassinated. Right, so that's all good stuff, but strangely, they don't reward Mordecai. Somehow, rather than being rewarded, they forget. They overlook it, which isn't normal, I would have thought. So you just wonder, well, what happened there? Mordecai saved the king's life. Surely you're going to get a medal or a handshake or something out of this, but nothing. So you wonder, did something happen in the king's life that diverted his attention, right? Took his mind off it? If there was, then that's another unidentified coincidence that at this point in time, rather than rewarding Mordecai, he forgets, which becomes quite relevant because that's a major factor in how the Jews are going to be rescued and delivered from potential extermination, because they forgot to thank Mordecai. Chapter 3. Let's read verse 1. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes who were with him. So King promotes Haman. Haman is the bad guy, right? He's the guy with the black hat. And the Jews, of course, keep Purim as a celebration every year, festival mid-March this year. And they read the story of Esther, of course, during that festival. And the kids quite like it because when you get to the name Haman, every time Haman's name is mentioned, the kids stamp their feet, right? And boo, hiss, boo, hiss. They have little rattles. They shake the rattles. So it's a bit of fun for the kids to get engaged in the story. But Haman, boo, hiss, Haman, boo, hiss, right? And this is the man, Haman. And all the king's servants who were within the king's gate bowed and paid homage to Haman. You think King Ahasuerus is arrogant. This guy is like off the charts arrogant. For so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. Oh dear. Then the king's servants who were within the king's gate said to Mordecai, why do you transgress the king's command? Now it happened when they spoke to him daily, and he would not listen to them, that they told it to Haman to see whether Mordecai's words would stand, for Mordecai had told him he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow or pay him homage, Haman was filled with wrath. All right? But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai. Instead, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, the people of Mordecai. Well, that's insane if you think about it. It's one thing to say this guy here doesn't bow down and tug his forelock, so I'm going to take action against him, or banish him from the kingdom, or kill him, whatever. But Haman decides he wants to kill all the Jews. There might be 2 million in the empire. I mean, that's disproportionate. That's lunatic. Makes you wonder whether Haman had another influence upon him. Perhaps Satan the devil possessed him or influenced him, because Satan knows that from the tribe of Judah, the Messiah will be born. If you can exterminate the people of Judah, you would terminate perhaps the lineage down to the Messiah, Jesus the Christ. So perhaps Haman, physical human being with a bit of a temper and very arrogant, maybe Satan's working through him. And of course Satan, in that case, is hidden as well. So Esther is sort of hidden. Her identity is still hidden at this stage. God is hidden. You don't see him explicitly anywhere here, right? And perhaps Satan's here in the background too, hidden, but working through Haman to try and bring about the destruction of the Jewish people. Let's read verses 7 through 9. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast Pur, that is, the lot, before Haman to determine the day and the month, until it fell in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. So he wants to get to what the gods determine will be the right date to kill all the Jews and destroy them, right? So he's going to throw these lots. So the lot is called a Pur, P-U-R, and the plural, casting lots plural, is Purim, P-U-R, then you add I-M to make it a plural. So it's a festival of Purim, still called that today. Like I say, I think it's the 14th or 15th of March this year. The Ides of March is Purim, Festival of Purim, named after the lots. And so they do that on the first month of the year. They cast these lots, and it comes out and says that it's going to be the 12th month when the destruction of the Jews is to take place according to the lots, which you could think is, again, an interesting coincidence, a helpful coincidence, because what would have happened if the Purim had turned out and said a month's time, second month of the year, the destruction will take place 6 weeks later? Ooh, that might cause problems trying to get things organized to deliver the Jewish people. But it says here it's going to take place in the 12th month. Well, that's 12 months' time. It gives you an entire year for certain events to take place, certain circumstances, certain pawns to be moved, certain ducks to be added to the lineup. So that's handy, right? If it had said second month of the year, oops. I mean, I'm sure God could have found a way around that, but nonetheless, the fact you've got 12 months to get organized and get things sorted out is a helpful coincidence. It's something that's mentioned, not going to turn there, but in Proverbs 16:33, if you want to take a note. Proverbs 16:33 says, "The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord." So I think there, I would take that to be that when they cast lots to kill the Jews, that God made sure that the lot, ding, fell on month 12. God thinking, I need plenty of time to sort this out. So I'm going to intervene there and make sure 12 months is ample time for me to sort this out. I don't want to be in a rush because it's all going to happen in 6 weeks' time. Let's read 10 through 15. No, need to finish verses 8 and 9. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, verse 8, "There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from other people's laws, and they do not keep the king's laws." That's probably not true, probably an exaggeration by Haman, but he's building a case. "Therefore it is not fitting for the king to let them remain. If it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who do the work, to bring it into the king's treasuries." So the king took his signet ring from his hand, gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. "Boo, hiss, stamp your foot." And the king said to Haman, "Boo, hiss, stamp your feet, shake your rattle. The money and the people are given to you, to do with them as seems good to you." Verse 12, "Then the king's scribes were called on the 13th day of the first month, and a decree was written according to all that Haman, boo, hiss, commanded, to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, to the officials of all the people, to every province, according to its script, and to every people in their language. In the name of King Ahasuerus it was written and sealed with the king's signet ring, and the letters were sent by couriers into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. Not only kill them, but take over their homes, their businesses, their shops, their inventory. A copy of the document was issued as law in every province, being published for all people, that they should be ready for that day. The couriers went out, hastened by the king's command, and the decree was proclaimed in Shushan, the citadel. So the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was perplexed. Well, the margin says, confused. Well, of course it would be. Jews have been living there for generations. Nobody's got a problem. Now all of a sudden there's an edict from the king, the emperor, who says, we're going to kill them all, destroy them all, and steal all their property on the 13th of the 12th month, right? Now, of course, think about it. The Jews are still exiles, fundamentally. They're not citizens exactly of the empire. They're the Jews. They were taken captive by Nebuchadnezzar. They're still lurking around. They didn't go back to Jerusalem. Probably should have done, but they didn't. A minority went back to Jerusalem. Ezra and Nehemiah, you know the stories there. But the majority stayed where they were. They were comfortable, didn't fancy that long trek back to Judea. They don't know much about Judea any longer. They've forgotten their roots. Now they're happy here, and the people with whom they live are fairly happy, right? And now suddenly, kill them all. What's that all about, right? And how can they defend themselves? Because they don't have armies. They're not trained military people. They're farmers, they're shopkeepers, and things of that nature. They're carpenters. They don't have swords, don't have chariots. If this nation of this empire is going to come along and kill them, there's hardly any defense. Thankfully, of course, God has got their back. So let's read chapter 4. I'll read verses 1 to 3. When Mordecai learned all that had happened, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city. He cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went as far as the front of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And in every province where the king's command and decree arrived, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. I mean, they were dumbfounded. They were fearful because they can't defend themselves. It doesn't matter, there might be 1 or 2 million or more. They aren't trained fighters. They're not warriors. They're not military people. They're going to be exterminated. Children, babies, all of them. Right? So there's nothing they can do about it. Let's read verses 4 through 12. So Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her, and the queen was deeply distressed. Then she sent garments to clothe Mordecai, he's in his sackcloth, don't forget, and take his sackcloth away from him, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, whom he had appointed to attend her, and she gave him a command concerning Mordecai to learn what and why this was. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the city square that was in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries to destroy the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the written decree for their destruction, which was given at Shushan, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her, that he might command her to go in to the king, to make supplication to him, and plead before him for her people. So Hathach returned and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and gave him a command for Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court to the king, who has not been called, he has but one law, put all to death, except one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called to go into the king these 30 days. So she's saying, you can't just waltz in to the king and say, "Oh, king, please change your edict. Please turn around that decree. Oh, king, please don't do this. Not very nice of you to kill all my people." You can't see the king, let alone ask for such a request, which might also be pretty difficult, because if the king calls you, you're great. If you wander in of your own volition and the king's in a bad mood, your head's off. She said, "He hasn't seen me for a month." So they told Mordecai Esther's words, and Mordecai told them to answer Esther, "Do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place." Some faith there, thinks it will still happen, but let's deal with where we are. "But you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Quite a well-known verse, that one. And of course it's true. Well, how do we know, says Mordecai, whether you're where you are for this time, for this moment? Perhaps this has all been orchestrated behind the scenes. Perhaps the pieces on the chessboard have been moved to bring this about. You appear to be, says Mordecai, the right person in the right place at the right time. And he's given out a bit of a warning. Don't think you can duck this, because you'll perish if you do. So it does look, that this has all happened, providentially. A Jewish girl whose people are being threatened with extermination happens to be the consort, the wife, the young wife. I mean, what age is she here? I don't know, 20, perhaps 19. Young, beautiful, and she's as close to the king as you can get. So it's decision time for her. Does she duck and run? Does she go to the king, even though she's not been called, and try to explain this to him and get his approval, get his help? Is she willing to die for her people? Is she willing to do what is right, morally and ethically? Or does she duck and run? As a passage in Ecclesiastes says, there's a time to be silent and a time to speak. This looks like it's her time to speak, right? So let's read verses 15 through 17. "Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, 'Go, gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise, and so I will go to the king, which is against the law. If I perish, I perish.' So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther commanded him." So she's willing to put her life on the line, which is quite courageous for a 19 or 20-year-old girl, whatever age she's at this stage. The fact that they know that fasting is one way to entreat God shows that there's at least some vague religion still present among them all. Although the history, of course, of the Jewish people is absolutely terrible. Let's read chapter 5, verses 1 to 3. "Now it happened on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. So it was, when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, that she found favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter." Well, strange rituals, ceremonies they had in those days, but that's good. She's not dead. The plan to deliver the Jewish people would be a bit handicapped if, having got the Jewish young girl into the king's bed, so to speak, that she now ends up dead, right? "And the king said to her," verse 3, "What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given you, up to half the kingdom." Well, I don't think he means literally half the kingdom, but he just means whatever you want, up to the moon and back, right? And because he's in a good mood. She's found favor, and he says, "Come across, on you come, Esther, come over here, lass." And, holds out the golden scepter, and she taps it, and she's good to go. Because the king's in a very good mood. He's being very generous. "Anything you want, lass, up to half the kingdom even, it's yours. Just ask and it's done." Now, it's a helpful coincidence. So he's in a good mood, because what if he'd been in a bad mood? What if he'd had a dodgy curry the night before? spent all night in intestinal pain and distress. What if he had bad toothache and lost hours of sleep? And he woke up now, he's bad-tempered and disgruntled. And he sees her, he says, execute that lass. I didn't call for her, right? It could have happened that way. She could have lost her life. So it's interesting that it just so happens that he's in a very, very good mood, right? That makes it a very generous offer. You can have anything you want, lass, up to half the kingdom. It's a reminder of Proverbs 21:1, which says, don't turn there, the king's heart is in the hands of the Lord, like the rivers of water. He, God, turns it wherever he wishes. So I'm sure God was there ensuring that the king had a great night's sleep. He woke up, the sun's shining in the sky. He feels good, right? Oh, there's my beautiful young wife. Oh, come on across, Queen Anna. Let's have a chat. Let's read verses 4 to 8. So Esther answered, if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman, boo, hiss, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him. Then the king said, bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared. I mean, Haman was pretty senior in the government. He was the top of them all. But of course, the king is way above that. So the king can ask anything, demand anything, have anybody put to death. In those days, there weren't courts that had to investigate these things. If the king said, don't like that guy, chop his head off, done. Of course, but earlier the king said, oh, you want to execute 2 million people? Yeah, fair enough, off you go. Right? Kings can do that in those days. And so Haman's going to be summoned, but of course he's delighted to be summoned to the queen's banquet. Oh, my word. Oh, what an honour. Verse 6, at the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, what is your petition? It shall be granted you. What is your request? Up to half the kingdom, it shall be done. He's still in this very benign, generous mood. Then Esther answered and said, my petition and request is this. If I have found favour in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfil my request, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said. So she doesn't proceed. The idea is she's going to ask the king to protect the Jewish people, her people. Now, for some reason, she delays. Right? It's not clear why she delays. Did she just chicken out? Well, it's not easy. I mean, it's easy for us to read the story and think, oh yeah, of course there's no problem there, but she's 19 or 20. Right? She knows that her being a Jewess, isn't public knowledge. She doesn't quite know how the king will respond to that information. Right? She gets to this banquet, she should be saying, how about intervening for my people, the Jews, please, O king. You said half the kingdom. Well, it's not quite as much as that. How about it, lad? But she chickens out. Or for some other reason, God intervenes and leads her to call for a 24-hour delay. It just happens. It's another of these coincidences. But it turns out this delay of a day makes a huge difference to the outcome of the story. If there was no delay, it may have worked out very differently. So that doesn't look like anything. But by her just saying, tell you what, let's come back tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll tell you the whole story. So she implies she's willing to say the whole story, willing to put her request to the king, but not till tomorrow. And in that gap of 24 hours, dramatic events take place, which is another sort of coincidence, right? So let's read verses 9 through 14. So Haman went out that day joyful with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand or tremble before him, he was filled with indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself. Probably thought I'd go across and give him a good kicking, but instead of that, he carries on home. And he sent and called for his friends and his wife Zeresh. Then Haman told them of his great riches, the multitude of his children, everything in which the king had promoted him, how he had advanced him above all the officials and servants of the king. Proud, arrogant, right? And now he's being invited to a personal, private banquet with the queen. Oh, my word. I deserve it, of course, but it's still good to receive. Verse 12. Moreover, Haman said, besides, Queen Esther invited no one. Can you believe this? No one but me to come in with the king to the banquet that she prepared. And tomorrow I'm again invited by her, along with the king. Wow, so important. People like me. I mean, I'm adored by people. She likes me. She wants me to go with the king because she sees my value, my importance. Yet all this avails me nothing, so long as I see that scumbag Mordecai, the Jew, sitting at the king's gate. Spit, spit, spit. Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, let a gallows be made. The wife says this. Well, I have to watch some women by the looks of it. So his wife Zeresh leads the group and says, tell you what, lad, let a gallows be made, 50 cubits high. That sounds fairly high up. And in the morning, suggest to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it. That'll teach him. Then go merrily with the king to the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, so he had the gallows made. Right? So he's going to invite, the king to execute, or allow him to execute Mordecai. Right? And of course, that's not really typically going to be a problem for the king. The king's already signed off killing 2 million Jews, just like that. Right? No compunction. And, the king is probably used to executing all sorts of people for various reasons, good, bad, and indifferent. So when he suggests to the king, this nasty Jew here who sits outside your gate, he's a really nasty piece of work, all these accusations against him, right? And so on. I think it's right and proper that we demonstrate how pure we are as a system and deal with this nasty piece of work. And of course, the king's going to say, yeah, whatever you want, mate. I trust you. You're high up. You're my top man. So if you want to execute this guy for various crimes, that's fine by me. Here's my ring. Go and decree it and get it sorted out. So that's it. We now know that Mordecai is going to be executed one day later on a gallows, 50 cubits high. Does that happen? Well, of course, you read the story, you know the outcome. But we'll look at the details of what happens next week. So come back to hear the rest of the story. That's us for today.